Okay, folks, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. So good evening and welcome to day 3 of our final day of our Introduction to Trout Fishing program, our Friday evening webinar series. I'm Dan Dow, and I'll again be your host and moderator tonight. On behalf of Trout Unlimited, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, today we want to thank you for being here with us. Just a real quick recap to what we've covered so far in this series. Day 1, we learned all about our gear that we needed to catch trout. Last week, our presenters shared with us some information about habits of trout and how to target them. And today, we're going to dive into the specifics of trout in Pennsylvania. So we have a really great presentation lined up tonight, featuring some of the leaders in both trout knowledge and trout conservation in the state of Pennsylvania. So hopefully we'll be able to give you some really good nuggets to take with you out into the field and help you get on the fish. Before we start though, I want to remind everybody that Fish for Free Day in Pennsylvania is this Sunday, May 30th. So Fish for Free Day allows anyone, resident or non-resident, to legally fish in Pennsylvania waterways with no fishing license required. Trout, salmon, stamp, and Lake Erie permits are also not required. All other fishing regulations still apply though, but these days are they're a great way to get out and get the family out fishing. So I'd like to kind of jump right in and we'll get into our agenda for the day today. So first, we're going to go over trout species and the trout waters of Pennsylvania. We'll talk about some regional opportunities and hotspots for trout that might be close to you. We'll dive a little bit into trout conservation in Pennsylvania. And then we're going to have a panel discussion with our esteemed group of panelists, and then we'll open it up to some public Q&A and make sure on that note to send your questions in through the chat function here in Zoom. So let me introduce our group of panelists for tonight. First, we have Mr. Timothy Schaeffer, the Executive Director from Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, and also David Nihart, who is the Division of Fisheries Management Chief for Fish and Boat Commission. We also have Greg Malaska, the President of Pennsylvania Council of Trout Unlimited, and Dr. Shawn Rummel, who is the Northeast Lead Science Advisor for Trout Unlimited. And finally, we have Mr. John Kline, who is the Policy Advisor for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And so without wasting any more time, we're going to hop right into talking about some trout opportunities with Dave Nihart. Take it away, Dave.
Thank you, Dan, and good evening, everybody. My name is David Nihart. In this portion of the presentation, we're going to talk about, what are some of Pennsylvania's trout fisheries, and we'll highlight a couple of the best places to fish throughout the state. So before we get into places to fish and what resources are available, we'll kind of touch base on really when you're fishing for trout in Pennsylvania, there's 3 species that you're typically going to fish for that are found in Pennsylvania streams and lakes. So the first one we'll highlight is the brook trout. And it goes by many different common names: hemlock trout, mountain trout, speckled trout. But anytime you hear that, it's referring to what we call the brook trout. The brook trout also happens to be Pennsylvania state fish. And in my opinion, and I think this picture highlights that, it's one of the prettiest fish that you'll catch in Pennsylvania and really anywhere. It is Pennsylvania's only native stream-dwelling trout. It's native to eastern North America, from eastern Canada all the way south through the Appalachian Mountains, south all the way to Georgia. Although it is currently widely distributed throughout the United States and Canada, it is stocked outside of its native range. It has in the past been stocked in the western United States as well. Brook trout require cool, clean water and are usually located in watersheds with high forest cover that are limited by development. Currently, most of these areas exist in our small headwater streams. We'll show you some couple maps later on of the distribution of our wild trout, and you can kind of see, as you would expect, forested areas throughout the state is where we tend to have some of the highest densities of wild trout. So the next species we'll talk about is the brown trout. It goes by a couple of different common names as well. People refer to them as German browns and salmon trout. Again, anytime you hear one of those terms, it's referring to what we call the brown trout. Brown trout are not native to Pennsylvania, but we are fortunate enough to have many wild populations that are very abundant throughout the state. And a lot of our really high biomass and world-class fisheries, when people think of wild trout fishing in Pennsylvania, consist of wild brown trout. As I mentioned, they're not native to Pennsylvania. They're native to Europe and Western Asia. They were first introduced in the United States in 1883, initially in New York and Michigan waters. They are widely distributed throughout the U.S. and Canada as well. Similar to brook trout, they're heavily stocked by other state agencies throughout the United States. Generally, they prefer larger streams and they are more tolerant to warmer water temperatures than what brook trout are. But there are many populations where they do coexist in the same streams as brook trout. So you'll find, typically in north central PA and really a lot of the waters where we have wild trout, it's not uncommon to catch both wild brown trout and wild native trout in the same, or wild brook trout in the same system. The last species we'll talk about is rainbow trout, and this is also a very colorful fish that you can encounter in Pennsylvania as well. They have a couple of different common names. Just two of them that come to mind are steelhead and kamloops. They are not native to Pennsylvania. We do have a few wild populations that are present in PA. Again, unlike brown trout, wild populations of rainbow trout are rare in Pennsylvania. This species is native to the Pacific coast, Canada, and the United States, and it's also found in Russia as well. They are widely distributed through the US and worldwide, and this is probably one of the most, as far as trout species, is probably one of the most stocked and introduced species throughout the United States and world. It's generally found in small to moderately large streams, and it does prefer low gradient lime streams. So some of the areas in the state where we do have populations of wild rainbow trout, typically in the south central part of the state where we have some of our true limestoners, that's kind of their preferred habitat. Also, you can see on the inside of this picture what we refer to as a golden rainbow trout. We do stock these. We stock about 14,000 of these every year for anglers to catch. And all the golden rainbow trout is, it's just a color variant of a rainbow trout. So it's not a different species. It's not a subspecies. It's just a color variation of a rainbow trout. So what types of waters can you expect to encounter trout in Pennsylvania? So typically, we're breaking them down into three categories. We have streams. So this could be anywhere from, a small mountain stream to a larger system. Rivers, something, like the Lehigh River, Little Juniata River, Lackawanna River, some of our bigger systems that still either we can find wild trout in or are stocked with hatchery trout. And then finally, lakes. So any type of natural or man-made impoundment in Pennsylvania would be categorized as a lake. So there are six major drainages in Pennsylvania. The Delaware drainage, a couple of the main tributaries to the Delaware would be the Lehigh and the Schuylkill. The Erie drainage, so up in northwestern PA, so anything that's a tributary to Lake Erie is in the Erie drainage. The smallest one in Pennsylvania is Genesee drainage. This is a very small portion of this drainage is located in north central Potter County. The Ohio drainage, so when you think of the Allegheny, the Monongahela, the Youghiogheny River, those are all tributaries that are in the Ohio drainage. Potomac drainage, so this is the drainage that's on the south central part of the state. It borders Maryland, the Conococheague, Antietam, a couple major tributaries. And then lastly, the biggest one in our state is the Susquehanna. And this would be, the West Branch, the Juniata River are two really big tributaries that make up the Susquehanna watershed. Pennsylvania has over 86,000 miles of flowing water, which is second only to Alaska. So there's a pile of flowing waters in Pennsylvania for sure. So that just means a lot of opportunities for anglers to fish for trout and other species that are present in them. We do have 425 natural lakes and impoundments in the state. We're also blessed to have about 40 miles of shoreline on Lake Erie. So the next two slides will cover some of the resources that are available in Pennsylvania kind of really broadly. The first, you've heard me say the term wild trout, and we've also mentioned stock trout as well. So now we'll talk about wild trout. So the map on the left shows the statewide distribution of wild trout streams. So first, when we say wild trout, what are we referring to? So when we toss around the terms wild trout, we're talking about fish that were actually born and raised in a stream. So they're not a product of a hatchery system at all. So these are fish that are occurring naturally within these systems. We have just over 5,600 streams in Pennsylvania where we've documented wild trout that total about 17,000 miles of streams. So we have 86,000 plus miles throughout the state, and a little over 17,000 that we've documented wild trout in. And wild trout are present in 63 of the 67 counties within the state. So there's only 4 counties where we haven't documented wild trout. So again, there's pretty good distribution throughout the state of wild trout. And you can see on the map, if you're familiar with Pennsylvania and some of the regions, looking at North Central, obviously that's where we have our highest density of wild fish. And it's just because when you look at the land use there, this is also happens to be where we have some of our biggest tracts of state forest, so land that typically is undisturbed. And also when you look in the Laurel Highlands and the Pocono Mountains. So again, those are really the areas where we have some of our best distributions of wild fish. The map on the right is our Class A wild trout streams. So these are a subset of our wild trout streams. So typically when you hear people saying, I want to go fish for some wild trout, or, what's some of the best places to fish for wild trout, what waters are these? This is when we get into the waters that are on our Class A wild trout streams. So these represent truly what are the best of our wild trout streams. So again, these are all wild fish, but these just happen to be our best wild trout streams based off of the biomass, so the total weight of fish within a particular stream section. We have almost 1,100 stream sections, or nearly 2,900 miles throughout the state that have Class A biomasses. So again, just an enormous amount of opportunities to fish for wild trout throughout the state. There's 56 of 67 counties that contain Class A wild trout streams. So again, most of these areas, throughout the state, no matter what county you're in, you're going to be pretty close to a Class A wild trout stream. So the next thing we'll talk about is our stock trout opportunities. So again, the map on the left, this represents the stream sections that we stock with hatchery fish. Again, this would just be adult fish, so fish that are catchable size. Typically, when we're coming out stocking fish from the hatchery, we're striving for a 10-inch average size fish. The goal of stocking these streams is to provide recreational fishing in streams during the spring and early summer months. And it should be noted that in most cases, if these streams weren't stocked with hatchery trout, there would be very little recreational fishing opportunity, especially during the spring, early summer period. We stock 1,050 stream sections, or roughly 4,600 miles of stream with hatchery trout. And again, as you can see, every single county in Pennsylvania has a stock trout stream section. So no matter where you live, you're going to be near a stream section that is stocked with hatchery trout. The map on the right shows the distribution of our stock trout lakes. And again, most of our lakes, when you look about as far as fishing opportunities, obviously most of them contain some sort of warm, cool water angling opportunities. We don't have wild trout that are found in most of our lakes, just given that they're so warm. So if we didn't stock trout in them, those opportunities wouldn't exist for anglers. So we stock them in the spring and the summer, and there's also a few lakes that we'll stock in the fall and in the winter. In the winter months, that's just another diversity of angling opportunities that we provide by individuals who want to ice fish through the winter months for hatchery fish. We stock 128 lakes, roughly 7,000 acres of water, and 54 of the 67 counties have lakes that are stocked with hatchery trout. So what opportunities are out there on a regional basis? So this was broken down. We broke the state down into 6 regions that you can see here: the Northwest, North Central, Northeast, Southwest, South Central, and in the southeastern part of the state. So we'll get into a little better detail of what opportunities exist in these specific regions. So the first region we'll cover is the Northwest region. And again, we're going to highlight a few. I handpicked two what I would consider highlight areas to fish. And again, this is only 2. As you can see in the map, there's hundreds of more opportunities out there only identifying 2 in each region. So for the northwestern part of the state, we have 634 wild trout streams and are nearly 2,000 miles of streams where we've documented wild trout. Also, as far as the stock trout angling opportunities, we have about 146 stream sections that total roughly 750 miles. And there's also 10 lakes in this region that we stock with trout as well. 2 that I want to highlight is Lake Erie. Everybody knows that, Lake Erie itself is a world-class fishery for walleye, lake trout, and steelhead. But specific to a couple of the tributaries to Lake Erie, you can see here in the picture of a steelhead run that's occurring in one of the tributaries. And this is really a great opportunity for anybody, whether you're a novice or experienced angler, to finish or to fish a tributary to Lake Erie either in the fall or springtime and really experience catching a fish of a lifetime. I mean, it's not uncommon to come across, a 7, 8, 9, 10 pound steelhead on a trip up there. And that truly is something that will last with many anglers, regardless of their experience level. The next stream I chose to highlight is Oil Creek. So this is in Venango County. This is a stream we currently stock 7 sections of Oil Creek. Roughly 35 miles of Oil Creek is stocked by the Fish and Boat Commission. And I highlighted this one because this stream section has 2 DH areas located on it as well. So these would be special regulation areas that the Fish and Boat Commission has put in place to provide a diversity of angling opportunities up there. So the Delayed Harvest Artificial Lures Only program allows for anglers to fish these streams year-round with catch and release until June 15th, and after June 15th, until Labor Day weekend harvest can occur. Also of note on Oil Creek, we do have a section of Oil Creek that is managed as a Keystone Select Water. This is a program that started in 2016 and was very popular with anglers and has expanded almost every year since, and we're up to 23 sections that are in this program. But the Keystone Select program is applied to certain DH waters and miscellaneous special regulation waters. And these are areas where we stock roughly anywhere from 175 to nearly 250 brood trout per mile. So a brood trout from our hatchery system, these are what people consider large fish, anywhere from 14 to 20 inch size fish. So again, perfect opportunity for anybody to go there and target large fish. So the next region we're going to talk about is the Southwest region. You can kind of see here, as far as resources available on the wild trout setting, it's kind of sparse compared to Northwestern PA and North Central PA. When you look at that, and we mentioned before that there's only 4 counties in the state that we haven't documented wild trout. 3 of them are in Southwestern PA when you look at Beaver, Washington, and Greene County. And this isn't a surprise. When you look at historic distribution of brook trout, which again is the only native native stream dwelling trout in Pennsylvania, this is really outside of their historic range. So it's not a surprise that we're not documenting or finding wild trout in these areas. And just even looking at Pittsburgh and the urbanization, that certainly has an impact on wild trout resources as well. But to talk about the good news in this area, I'll highlight the West Branch of the Susquehanna River. So this will be the Red Star up in Cambria County. And I know Shawn Rummel will talk about this in his presentation as well, but this is really a success story. This river was really once at one point devoid of any, wild fish and fish in general just because of mining legacy. But through the hard work of not only the Fish and Boat Commission and TU, but many other nonprofits and conservation districts or conservation organizations, this stream has rebounded, and it's rebounded to a point where we actually have a Class A fishery on a portion of this stream. So it is a success story, and it's something that's, 40 years ago, people never would have believed we've been in this position. Not only is it a success story, it's a great place to fish. There's portions of the West Branch where we do stock. As mentioned, there's also areas that harbor wild trout as well. The Twin Lakes Reservoir, there's Twin Lakes Reservoir number 1 and number 2. They're right next to each other, and this is the Purple Star. So this would be in the Greensburg, Latrobe area. Again, I just highlighted this because, lakes and lake fishing really provide great opportunities for beginners and families and anybody that wants to enjoy fishing. This is like the perfect setting to get somebody involved in fishing because typically you know, you don't have to worry about, you know, walking through a stream, and you always know you're going to have good access. So these two lakes here provide that. They're stocked by the Fish and Boat Commission throughout the year and during the fall. And you can see in the picture here one of our now retired biologists holding up two big golden rainbow trouts that they collected during trap netting. So you can see that quite a diversity of fish, and not only, you know, warm, cool water, but trout as well can be caught in this system. So the next region is the North Central region, and you can see here that the map on the left is pretty much filled up with green lines and yellow lines. Again, this is where we have some of our best wild trout resources throughout the state. Actually, it is the area where we have the best resources throughout our state. So really anywhere you want to go and target trout, whether it's hatchery or stock trout, pretty much anywhere you throw a line, you're probably going to run into some wild fish. It's just that good in the North Central part of the state. And you can see that really nearly 2,900 miles of wild, or 2,900 streams where we've documented wild trout, almost 7,500 miles. There's 260 plus stream sections that we stock, over 1,200 miles. And again, 22 lakes in this area. So this really is the mecca for trout fishing, whether it's wild or stock trout opportunities, is the North Central part of the state. Kinzua Creek, McKean County, would be in the Allegheny National Forest. So Kinzua Creek would be a tributary to the Allegheny Reservoir. And similar to Oil Creek, there's multiple sections. We stock roughly 20 miles of this stream. I think 4 sections are stocked. And one of those sections as well also has a Keystone Select area. You can see the young man here is a proud recipient of catching a large trout in that area. So again, this is the perfect place that you want to take a youngster, or really anybody, knowing that kind of fish is going to be waiting for you when you show up to fish that stream. Then the next stream we'll highlight is Spring Creek. And when people think about wild trout fishing, and, you know, what we often get asked, you know, what is one of the, if not the best wild trout stream in Pennsylvania? And more times than not, somebody's going to say Spring Creek. Spring Creek is located in Center County. It starts outside of Boalsburg, which would be outside of State College, so near Penn State University. It flows through Bellefonte before dumping into Vaudeville Creek. And it truly is a awesome place to fish. And just living in this area and having the benefit of doing so, I've fished Spring Creek many times, and it's not uncommon to drive up Spring Creek and see, you know, license plates from out of state. So it truly is a destination fishery. Whether you're a beginner or not, fish are typically easy to catch on Spring Creek. So I would certainly recommend, if you're interested in pursuing wild trout, Spring Creek is definitely a good place to start. So the next, we'll talk about the South Central region. There's nearly 500 wild trout streams, or over 2,000 miles of trout streams in the South Central PA. Nearly 200 stock stream sections that can total about 1,000 miles. And there's also 20 lakes that we stock. And this part of the state is where, you know, people talk about limestone streams. This is the area of the state where we have our, what you can call a true limestoner. And a couple I won't talk about in great detail, but I'll mention just because I'm sure the names will ring a bell, is people always say Big Spring Creek, Latort, Yellow Breeches, Fallen Spring. So those are some really high profile streams in this area. But two I want to talk about specifically, just given the audience today, is Children's Lake, which is in Cumberland County, just outside of Carlisle. It actually sits on the banks of the world famous Yellow Breeches stream, or Yellow Breeches Creek, I'm sorry. And this is, when you see pictures online of opening day, and just, you know, the first couple of weeks after opening day, and people are standing shoulder to shoulder, you know, families and everybody having a good time, Children's Lake is the one that comes to mind as the place to experience this type of setting. So if you're in the Carlisle, Harrisburg, Mechanicsburg area, I would recommend hitting Children's Lake. It's definitely very family-friendly atmosphere. The next stream I'll talk about is the Little Juniata River, which is located in Blair and Huntington County. So this would be Altoona, Tyrone area, and the Little J is truly one of those world-class fisheries for wild brown trout in Pennsylvania as well. One good thing about this stream as well, it's managed as catch and release. for the bottom end. So the Class A sections are managed as catch and release. But in this example, we allow the use of all tackle. So anybody wants to go there and fish, whether they're fishing with flies, spinners, worms, power bait, whatever your choice is. This is a stream in Pennsylvania where you can go and do that. And again, similar to Spring Creek, it's full of wild fish. And it's just a great opportunity to get somebody into wild trout fishing and going there having a high likelihood of being successful. So the northeast region of Pennsylvania, so this would be, the greater Pocono area, is very good for wild fish. It certainly has plenty of opportunities for stock trout angling as well. You can see here that a little over 900 streams or nearly 3,000 miles contain wild trout. We also stock about 150 stream sections or nearly 600 miles, and there's also 36 lakes that are stocked as well. So there's some very well-known streams in this area as well, like Monocacy Creek, Little Lehigh Creek, Bushkill, McMichaels, just to name a few that, people think of the Pocono area there's ones that jump out. So again, two of them that I picked, Hunter's Lake in Sullivan County. This is a lake that is owned by the Fish and Boat Commission. It is stocked with hatchery fish. It's stocked throughout the spring and summer, and it's also stocked in the fall. And one great thing about this lake is it's a decent sized lake. It's a little over 100 acres lake, so there's certainly room to spread out. But this lake, as far as boating, is managed for on-powered or electric use motors. So this is a perfect opportunity if you want to experience trout fishing in a lake setting in a canoe or kayak. You can do it in a safe condition. You don't have to worry about boaters, buzzing by you. So this is the kind of the perfect setting for not only to introduce somebody into fishing, but maybe introduce them into, kayaking or canoeing as well. The last one I'll talk about is the Lehigh River. It's the red star here. And again, the Lehigh River, there's 4 sections on the Lehigh that we stock. Again, anywhere from above FE water to below FE water. You can experience very remote fishing in the gorge below the Lehigh if you want, or you can experience, some more populated areas of Lehigh as well. But in general, the Lehigh River provides exceptional opportunities for anglers to fish for stock trout. So the last region we'll talk about is the southeast region. So this would be, the Philadelphia, the Reading, Hershey area. That's the area that this would include. So again, we do have wild trout resources in this part of the state. I mean, they're not as plentiful as other regions, but they're certainly available. We have over 350 streams where we've documented wild trout, about 1,300 miles. We also have 163 stream sections. There are nearly 600 miles that are stocked with trout. And then there's 15 lakes that are stocked with trout. So the two that I chose to talk about is Locust Lake in Schuylkill County. The great thing about this lake is it's a DCNR lake. So it's stocked by us. I think it's roughly about 50 acres in size. So it's a decent size impoundment. But it being on DCNR property, it makes it even more, family friendly because of the amenities that are there. So you can make a weekend out of this. You could, go there and enjoy, camping and whatever else you want to do outdoor, and also experience the trout fishing opportunities that come with that lake. The last one we'll talk about is Topahawken Creek in Berks County. This one, again, similar to Kinzoo Creek and Oil Creek, as I mentioned. We stock roughly 20 miles of this stream. There's 5 different sections that we stock. And there's also Keystone Select areas on this stream as well. So if you want to fish for just a normal stock trout water, you want to experience, fishing in a special regulation area, Topahawken Creek is definitely the place to experience that. So the last slide of my presentation, as I mentioned before, there's certainly more resources out there than what I have time to detail, or really anybody has time to detail. So this is a good opportunity to point out, where anybody can go, whether, you're a beginner or somebody that has, fished many, many years. Our Fish and Boat Commission's website is probably your greatest resource for identifying areas to fish throughout the state. So here I just pulled up the county guide. It's very user-friendly. You can go and you can search by county, and there's all sorts of layers that you can add to your map if you want to specifically target special reg areas, you want to target lakes, you want to target wild trout fisheries. All that can be populated on a map for you. And it's also available on our mobile app as well. And one really good thing about using on the mobile app is we'll actually give you, when you go in and you zoom into a water, and if you click on it, it'll give you driving directions on how to get to that specific water. So it's very user friendly. And also a couple other resources here, just our stocking guide, and then just our summary book that details all the waters that we stock. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. I mean, and I know that some additional information we provided at the end of the presentation, but if you're interested in finding, when and where to fish for Pennsylvania, certainly spend some time on our website. There's just a tremendous amount of resources that will certainly help you have the best trip possible.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. That was a ton of great information. And sort of in line with what Dave was just sharing, for this presentation, well, for this series, we've created a resource center that I will drop the link in to the chat a little bit later for everyone to view. I'll remind you at the end, but we're going to be emailing that out too in a follow-up email. And all those links that Dave talked about, and a bunch of other Fish and Boat Commission links, Trout Unlimited links, they're all in there for you to check out. So next, we're going to dig into a little bit of trout conservation in the state with Dr. Shawn Rummel, and I'll let Shawn take it away.
All right, thanks, Dan, and thanks, Dave, for a great presentation there. So like Dan mentioned, we wanted to shift gears a little bit and start to conversation towards conservation and what work is kind of currently being done in Pennsylvania and kind of beyond, because a lot of these issues kind of translate. So, as an angler, obviously conservation is important to us because we want to keep fishing good for ourselves. And so there's a little bit of selfish component to it, but ultimately the goal there is to make it better for future generations so that our kids and grandkids and great grandkids have better fishing opportunities than we have. And also just to conserve, our native fishes around. So I'm going to focus primarily on brook trout. As Dave mentioned, it's our native fish. And it has been in decline throughout its range, its native range from Maine to Georgia. And then there's a part of its native range over in kind of the Midwestern states as well, a small portion over there. But throughout its range, it's been in decline. And really that gets back to, a bunch of variables that we kind of see on the landscape. So one of the biggest ones is water temperature. Trout are obviously a cold water fish. So once we start getting temperatures above that 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, we start to see populations of brook trout start to decline. As we're within a watershed, if agricultural land use is above 2.5, somewhere between 2.5 to 25%, we see declines. Same goes with, we want to have a nice forested riparian zone. So the riparian zone is that area, maybe 50 meters on either side of the stream that kind of protects that stream. It shades it. It kind of filters the water moving into that stream. Without that area, again, our trout populations decline. And as Dave pointed to also, we have our best trout resources kind of in those heavily forested areas like the north central part of Pennsylvania. So we want to keep those levels high. Even things like road densities and impervious surface, we think of things like concrete and parking lots and paved roads and things like that. How much of that is in a watershed also contributes to, the overall health of brook trout. So you can really almost think of, anything we do on the landscape as humans, is probably detrimental to the brook trout just because they like really intact, cold, clean water. Move on to the next slide there. So, and all that's kind of exacerbated those things. We talked about stream temperatures. So when we start thinking about, future threats to populations as well, climate change certainly comes to mind. And some of the expected changes related to that and what types of habitat impacts that would have, as well as what kind of brook trout habitat or brook trout impacts those factors would have as well. So, we can think of things like, predicted warmer summer temperatures and lower summer flows. Both of those are going to lead to increased stream temperatures, decrease in suitable habitat for trout. So we're going to get reduced growth of trout. So we're going to maybe get smaller fish. We're going to have more death, so less survival, less reproduction. So that's all contributing to that downward trend in populations as a whole. Also increased stress, you also get into maybe non-native trout can start to outcompete trout because it's a little bit warmer environment. The next kind of expected change is, those more intense storm events where you get maybe less frequent rain, but when we do get rain, it seems to rain a couple inches at a time. That's just increasing the erosion and sedimentation in streams. And all that sediment that's coming off the stream banks has to go somewhere. So it's going into the streams. It's kind of filling in areas where the aquatic insects live. So we see decreases in the insect community, and that's the trout's food. So subsequently our trout populations decline as well. Those sediments can fill in the areas that trout use to spawn, so they're not able to reproduce, and it can also inhibit movement of fish to different areas of the streams. And then finally, more high flows in winter. If we're getting less snow and more rain in the winter, that tends to scour the stream beds. And it's a really critical time for trout because that's whenever the eggs are in those beds. And as that scours out, you can lose reproduction again. So that's just kind of, so brook trout have a lot going against them. So it's really important. And the work we do at TU primarily focuses on brook trout in Pennsylvania. The work that TU does in Pennsylvania anyway focuses mostly on brook trout. So Trout Unlimited's mission overall is just to conserve, protect, and restore North America's cold water fisheries and their watersheds. So we kind of have this model that we use, and really any conservation group, in some way is kind of following this general framework where we want to protect the areas that are pristine and have few impacts, and then reconnect those headwater areas with downstream areas. So we're reconnecting populations, making sure that fish can move to different areas of streams or move from a main stem of a stream up into a tributary. Maybe they do that in the summertime to get out of the warmer main stem temperatures, get up into the mountain streams. And then finally, the areas where habitat has been degraded, work to restore that habitat to levels that can sustain fishery populations as well. So really taking that framework, I'll talk more specifically about, I'm kind of speaking obviously through a Trout Unlimited lens, but just to put this out there, none of this work that I'm going to discuss here has been done solely by TU. All of this conservation work only gets done through a lot of partnerships. We work really closely with the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, DCNR, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Pennsylvania DEP, a whole slew of other conservation organizations, county conservation districts. So there's just, the list goes on with partners. So none of this work is ever done in a vacuum. It takes really good partnerships, but kind of our approach here is multifaceted. So it really all starts with conservation planning. So deciding where we work and what types of work we're going to do in that area. Then actually implement projects on the ground, and then monitor those projects and do research to determine, are those projects working, and if they're not, why, and how can we do it better? It kind of just consistently and adaptively managing our resources. So I'm going to walk through some of those steps and highlight a few projects here over the next few slides, and just to give you a broad overview of the type of work we do and some of the projects that we've completed. So from the conservation planning side of things, the goal here is just to prioritize the location and the types of the projects that'll have the most benefit overall at that population level. So we want to target areas where we can really have the most bang for our buck. And the way TU does this is through a tool that we recently developed called the Conservation Portfolio and Range-Wide Analysis for brook trout. So again, the goal of that was basically to take the entire eastern range of the brook trout and identify where are the conservation opportunities on the ground and what's the population status of brook trout within its range. So we have a whole lot of resources online there, and I know Dan's going to put this link. It's a cumbersome link. He's going to put it into the resources as well. So you can kind of play around with that. There's an online mapping tool that you can play around with there as well to kind of look through some of the data that goes into that. And then recently, we just completed an update for Pennsylvania Brook Trout Conservation Portfolio this year, working in collaboration with Fish and Boat Commission. We pulled in a lot of data goes into this to identify areas of trout habitat, including things like the trout population, the different habitat features that are on the ground, getting back to those thresholds that we talked about on the first slide, like the percent agricultural land use, percent riparian forest, how many dirt and gravel roads, a long list of those types of data, as well as data on future threats. So some of the climate forecasting models and potential for natural resource extraction in an area or urban development potential and things like that. And from all that data, the goal there is just to pull out, where are kind of our best of the best watersheds, not just from a trout population standpoint, but also from a habitat standpoint, where we can go in and kind of fix those things on the ground and secure those stronghold areas. And as you can see here, those are those areas in green that kind of pop out of that. And again, a large portion of that are high elevation areas. Those areas stay cold, they tend to be forested, and also in that north central tier of the state where we have most of our large forest tracts. And the whole goal here is to just build resiliency in trout populations. So when we talk about resiliency, that's just basically defined as the ability of a population to successfully cope in the face of a stressor or disturbance. So basically whatever future stressor that's coming down the pipe that we may not even know about at this point, we want populations that are large enough and genetically diverse enough to withstand that stressor and continue to be a viable population. So that's what we mean by resiliency, which we'll touch a little bit more on. So how do we go about doing that? And this all comes back to that protect, reconnect, and restore framework. So from kind of that portfolio idea, we start looking to protect and enhance those areas of high quality habitat that have large brook trout populations. So in other words, our stronghold areas. We want to restore those areas with degraded habitat quality. So areas that we've identified that, maybe they have brook trout populations, but the habitat is lacking in some way or another. And the way we go about that, we do a lot of different types of projects. Just to name a few, things like in-stream habitat improvements, replanting riparian areas with trees, remediating water quality, going in and working with farmers and doing agricultural improvements and things like that. And then finally, one of the big ones that we're doing a lot of work throughout the state on is just reconnecting populations. So David mentioned that a lot of our brook trout populations are kind of isolated up in these cold headwater areas. And as a result, they're fragmented from each other. So they're not necessarily connected to one another, which we want for building a nice resilient population. So part of that work is just removing barriers to movement, like that culvert that you see in the picture there. A fish that's wanting to move upstream to spawn or wanting to move upstream to get to colder water during July and August when it's really hot is not going to be able to make it through that culvert. You can see how it's kind of perched there with a little waterfall, and the water is really shallow in there. So that is a definite barrier to brook trout movement. So those barriers can be things like dams, culverts, like is in the picture, but it can also be things like water chemistry. We'll talk a little bit about abandoned mine drainage. Where you have pollution, that's certainly a barrier to movement, as fish aren't going to want to utilize a polluted stream. So when we talk about the project implementation side of things, I touched on this a little bit in the last slide, but some of the stuff we've done in Pennsylvania, those aquatic organism passage projects, abandoned mine drainage remediation, a lot of the in-stream habitat improvement, sediment reduction projects. Those are primarily in the form of working with Penn State Center for Dirt and Gravel Roads and with DCNR on a lot of their forestry roads as well, that are dirt roads that contribute a lot of sediment. So we've worked really successfully with them in improving those roads and reducing sediment that's running off of those into streams. The riparian plantings and doing agricultural best management practice, things like fencing cows out of streams, manure management plans, things like that. So I just want to touch on a couple of those and just highlight a few, but if we talk about the Reconnection project, so this, if you're familiar with the area, this watershed that's highlighted in the map is the Pine Creek watershed in north central Pennsylvania. It flows from north to south there, so top to the bottom of that map, and then it flows into the west branch of the Susquehanna, just west of Williamsport, about a half hour west of Williamsport. So one of the things that we're trying to do in Pennsylvania is build a data set of barriers to movement within kind of watershed by watershed, because currently that's lacking. So what we do have from that portfolio is kind of best case scenario. We don't know how fragmented populations are, and they're likely much more fragmented. So just to show you an example here, if you go to the next slide, all the barriers, we've assessed all the barriers in this watershed. And this is what it ends up looking like. There are 700 road stream crossings just in the Pine Creek watershed alone. 32% of those were complete barriers to fish movement, and 43 were reduced passage, meaning that they're only able to pass fish during certain stream flows when the stream's at a certain height. And only 24% of those 700 culverts allow full passage. So well designed culverts in the terms of fish passage. So once we have this data, we're able to kind of prioritize, which culverts would be most important, where can we get back the most miles of stream, where can we reconnect the streams to the larger main stems where they might have seasonally available habitat as well. And next slide will highlight one example of this in the Pine Creek watershed. So this is in Ott Fork. It's a tributary to Upper Pine Bottom Run, which flows into Pine Creek near Waterville. So this was a project that was a collaboration with TU Fish and Boat Commission and DCNR. We worked to remove three culverts that were barriers to movement. You can kind of see one of those examples and a before and after picture of that culvert. The top being the before and the bottom is the after replacement and the kind of habitat improvement that goes along with that. It's since been listed as a Class A brook trout stream by Fish and Boat Commission, and just a really high density of fish there. Just around the culverts, our crews moved about 250 brook trout just around those culverts to get them out of the way of the machinery and things. And overall, those projects reconnected over 3 miles of trout habitat. And we're doing those sorts of projects all throughout the state, as well as many other groups as well. The second project type is abandoned mine drainage, and Dave touched on this as well, but just to highlight and dig a little bit deeper into the west branch of the Susquehanna River watershed. So Dave mentioned, there's reports from the 1970s where the leading experts were kind of quoted as saying, restoring any sort of recreational value fishery to the upper portion of the watershed is near impossible, and would take so much money it would never be done. So since the 70s, a lot of cleanup effort has been done through a lot of different organizations. That one picture, so the bottom left-hand picture is a picture of a passive treatment system, which is one of the ways that abandoned mine drainage pollution is treated. And if any of you on the call are from Western Pennsylvania or up around the Scranton area, unfortunately, you're probably familiar with the red stream. So that's primarily due to abandoned mine drainage and all the iron pollution and aluminum and things coming out of the water. So really toxic environment. And really what was done in the West Branch was, kind of targeting a lot of these small drainages of pollution, cleaning up one by one on these small tributaries. And eventually enough of those tributaries were cleaned up to be able to see, large scale improvements on the main stem of the river itself. And we're seeing improvements from basically the headwaters all the way downstream to where it meets the Susquehanna proper. And the next slide will kind of illustrate some of this. So this is just, I know it's small and you can't read this, but just to provide an overview, kind of the colored dots on there. This is a study we just completed this past winter, where we looked, the river hadn't really been fully surveyed for about 10 years. So this is the newest results, kind of comparing results from 10 years ago. And basically every site that we sampled, with the exception of a few, showed increases in both aquatic insect life and also fish diversity. And the real notable thing there that Dave mentioned, that upper section of the watershed, kind of that left-hand side of the watershed down through Clearfield, has all been listed as wild trout. And that's an area that was completely devoid of fish for the most part, and aquatic life in general. So really is a huge successful story highlighting, how those small scale efforts kind of add up over time to have these really big changes on a river the size of the West Branch. And then I think it's the last thing I'll highlight here is the Instream habitat improvement. So, we prioritize these to areas that have really few other stressors. So areas that are primarily forested, don't have a lot of agriculture, things like that. It may have issues from the legacy of timber harvest and things from way back during the timbering days. We also target areas that tend to have moderate density fish populations, just so we can try to increase that trout abundance and maybe get that up to a Class A status. And these types of projects, it ranges from, there's a wide range of projects types that we could spend a couple hours going through in-stream habitat improvement as a topic. But in general, we're just adding structure, overhead cover, trying to deepen pools, things like that, adding large wood to streams. And those projects have been shown in the scientific literature to increase trout abundance and biomass, actually increases flood resiliency downstream. So the flooding's less severe downstream whenever the headwaters are able to spread out onto their floodplain and function like the stream should function. You get a reduction of sediment because those structures kind of capture sediment there. Rather than just transporting it all downstream, and also get an increase in insect life as well, which is obviously good for the trout in turn. So those are kind of just a quick overview of the types of projects that we do. There's a lot more out there, a lot more digging in that you can certainly do as you have time. But there are some ways that you can certainly become involved. And probably a good place to start is Trout Unlimited's community science page. This is all geared towards community engagement and getting everyday people out and collecting data that is actually being used in a meaningful way by state agencies, by Trout Unlimited, by other groups to make decisions on trout management and things like that. So that site provides a really good overview of that. One of the things in there that you'll read about is actually a mobile app that you can download called Rivers app. And that allows you basically, if you're out fishing or even if you go for a hike along a stream somewhere, if you see any issues with a stream, you know, if there's a stream bank that's severely eroded, or if you come across one of those perch culverts that it looks like an obvious barrier to fish, you can document that, take a picture of it. It automatically takes a GPS coordinate of where that's at. And then that's uploaded onto kind of a master database that you can then go in and see. And, you know, folks working with that app can also see, and that helps point some of our field crews, maybe if we're working in a particular watershed, if anglers or community members have collected some of that data, we can take a look at that and get a feel for what's on the landscape before we even get out there, which is a huge help. Then there's also things like stream temperature and water quality monitoring that goes on as well. Second big thing you can do, Dave talked a lot about the wild trout streams, and we're going to talk a little bit more about here on the next slide, but just provide support to the listing of wild trout streams. So every quarter, Fish and Boat Commission meets to approve new trout streams that have been found through a program called the Unassessed Waters Initiative, which we'll touch on briefly here. But they always seek public comment for those, and the more support letters that are written, you know, supporting those listings, the more helpful that is. So that link will take you to Fish and Boat's proposed regulation changes and things like that, that you can provide public comment as well. And the other thing you can do is just, you know, become involved with Trout Unlimited or another local conservation organization. You know, a lot of groups out there, backcountry hunters and anglers, conservation districts, all do stream cleanups, tree plantings, other local conservation projects that they'll be more than happy to have as many hands help them as possible. So those are just a few quick ways you can get involved. And then to go back to the support listings of wild trout streams for the Unassessed Waters Initiative. So this is a project that began back in 2010. And the goal was to basically go out and survey streams that had never been surveyed. And what everybody's looking for is the presence of native and wild trout populations. And the reason for that is that the presence of those naturally reproducing populations warrants additional protections from DEP and things like that. So this was launched by Fish and Boat Commission. They've tied in a lot of partners, including conservation groups and a lot of universities throughout the state. Our office has been a partner since almost the beginning, since 2011. Since then, you know, and this is just our field crews. The other, you know, Dave can probably fill in more of the broader picture, but from TU's perspective, we've been able to survey a little over 1,100 streams over that 10-year period. Well over 150 streams, 150 of those have actually been added to the wild trout list or to the Class A listing. And really, we're finding trout present in about 30 to 40% of the streams that we survey. So I guess I'll throw it back to Dave if he wants to add in anything on the broader context of that.
Yeah, certainly, Shawn. Thank you. And I won't go too much longer because I know me and Shawn have talked enough. But yeah, so really the Unassessed Waters program, it's really the first time something like this has been done in the nation. And really, our current executive director, Tim Schaeffer, back in 2009, whenever this was coming to light, played a huge role in getting this off the ground. And it's something that our agency is certainly proud of. And as Shawn mentioned, it's really a great opportunity to not only identify, you know, new wild trout streams and get a better understanding of what resources are out there. I mean, this information is really the building blocks when it comes to management and conservation. So it truly is valuable. But in another added benefit is just this really gets the opportunity for many, you know, young individuals, college age kids, experience in this field. And it's certainly, you know, we have staff that work for us full time now that were once, you know, a college student that participated in this program. So it certainly is provide that opportunity for individuals to get into a conservation field. And as Shawn mentioned, TU has been with us since nearly the beginning. They were not part of the initial year, but have been a partner ever since. And without them, they do great work, and we're glad to have them included in the program as well. But since the beginning, we've sampled almost 8,000 streams since 2010, and that includes both cooperators, which as Shawn mentioned, college universities, other nonprofits, and also include our PFBC staff. And of those 8,000 streams, roughly 2,000 of them have been added to the wild trout streams list, or over 2,000, I'm sorry, which is almost 4,600 miles of streams that have been added to the wild trout list in the last decade as a result of this program. So it truly is unique, and it's a great opportunity, and it's something that I know, Tim is very proud of as well. And, its agency is it's one of our premier programs that we have.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you so much for all of that information. That was a ton of just really great, juicy facts and kind of everything you'd want to know about trout in Pennsylvania. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to pull us out of the presentation here. We're going to bring the panel in, folks, and introduce you again to everyone. And then I'd like to, we're going to have some panel questions here. And then we will we'll jump into the audience Q&A. So folks, if you have questions, please drop them into the chat for our panel. And then let me just get right up in here and exit out of this. Okay, so first things kind of first here. I want to bring in Tim Schaeffer, Greg Malaska from Pennsylvania Trout Unlimited, and John Kline from Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And gentlemen, I kind of wanted you to just start out. We have a good audience here of new anglers that are learning about trout fishing and trout fishing in Pennsylvania. Tim, we'll start with you. What would you kind of like to share for them? Why are you excited for this audience to be here, and what do they have to look forward to?
I think, and can you hear me okay? One thing that really makes me excited, the presentations that Dave and Shawn gave, I think it shows that trout fishing and what water conservation are relevant to everybody. We talked as much today about conservation districts and dirt and gravel roads and climate change as we did about fishing. And what excites me is that the people are getting into the sport are future conservationists. They may have never thought about getting involved with local land use planning or planting trees, and they never knew what a riparian buffer was. But one thing that really excites me is this makes conservation relevant to a whole new audience. Last year we saw a 20% increase in fishing license sales in Pennsylvania. And one of the things that the research showed here, as well as nationwide, is that the people that got into the sport last year had a really strong conservation ethic. Hopefully you'll remember some things that come out of this evening's session, but it excites me for the audience to really understand the strong partnership we have in Pennsylvania between the state agencies and nonprofits like TU and Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. It really, really is a joint effort. Last thing I'll say about what gets me excited is I think it might get some folks excited to get involved. Obviously, fishing's why we're doing it. Fishing's what's fun about it. What excites me about tonight is it may make someone reconsider getting involved with the local conservation group. Heck, run for office in your township. You really want to affect land use change in Pennsylvania, really get involved at local government level. So to me, I think the most exciting part is bringing conservation, the relevance of it to the front of mind to everybody who's listening.
Thanks, Tim. Greg, I want to take a stab at the question as well.
Sure, Dan, thanks a lot. TU has generally been perceived as a group with an older membership, those in their 50s, 60s, 70s. What's so exciting about events and series like this is the BHA is the exact opposite. They're growing, and they're really growing that 20 to 50 demographic. As Tim said, having more anglers on the streams means you have more advocates on the stream. We don't want to be that team that has too many old veterans. We want to have that farm system coming up, and working with groups like BHA and finding new younger anglers. That's going to ensure we have a whole new generation of both anglers and conservationists moving forward.
Thanks, Greg. And John, chance to introduce yourself, and same question for you.
Sure. Hi, John Kline with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks all of you for being here. And as Greg just said, the demographic of Backcountry is a much younger group. But just two things that I wanted to point out with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We encourage everyone here to take a look at our website and hopefully join the Pennsylvania chapter. But Backcountry is built on a few tenets, and you know, public land is as populated as Pennsylvania is, with nearly 13 million people. We're very, very fortunate to have nearly 3 million acres of public land. And a lot of these waterways, many of these waterways are on public land. So the preservation of the public land, access to that land and water are the things that we really advocate for. And we ask you, as Greg said, and Tim said, to become involved. And you know, programs like Take Two, where although it was originally intended for backcountry members to take two people hunting, the same thing could apply to people fishing. So we stress to our members to do that too. So and other activities, stream cleanup, you know, Dr. Rummel mentioned stream cleanups and game land cleanups and things like that. Backcountry's engaged in. We're also, Backcountry, as well as TU, is also a part of a sportsman's policy group here in Pennsylvania, advocating for the policy side to keep all these great programs and resources that you've seen tonight intact, and to hopefully increase. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, John. So for the group, and really these are kind of, it's organizational question. Can we share a little bit more, or is there topics that we can talk about that are some specific projects that might be happening right now that maybe folks would be able to see? I know we talked about some of the unassessed waters. Is there anything else that's out there that we can hone in on a little bit?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. We would not be at an event with Trout Unlimited without mentioning our Trout in the Classroom program. If anybody who's listening has school-age kids, this has been a program that we kicked off with TU a number of years ago that has just grown by leaps and bounds, where we work with teachers. We're now in over 400 classrooms in Pennsylvania, where we provide trout eggs. In a typical school year, it was in October, but we work with the teachers to help to build a cold water curriculum in their schools. Again, we talk about building that next generation. That is a program that's absolutely thriving across Pennsylvania. If anybody who's listening is a teacher, if you have a kid who's in school, you think, man, this would be a great program to bring to the school. Again, Trout in the Classroom. You can check our website to get information about that. Cody Whipple runs the program for us. That's a really strong program that's been a great partnership between the Fish and Boat Commission and Trout Unlimited.
Dan, one thing we've really tried to focus on is habitat improvement. The last, few chapters are generally pretty energetic, pretty passionate, and the challenge we faced over the last 15 months is, you take all that type A, very active, very energetic, very passionate membership, and you put them in a box. We've been in a box for 15 months. I think what we've done as an organization is we tried to enhance and facilitate as many funding opportunities for habitat improvement. We've boosted up our Forever Wild grant program nationally. There's an Embrace the Stream program. I think as we get out of this pandemic, I think you're going to see TU chapters go into, I'm going to call it the golden age of local conservation. I think you have all that energy has been pent up. They've been, rolling their quarters, saving their money, and thinking about what they're going to do when they can get back, shake hands, and get back in. We're really excited about the funding programs we have and the amount of conservation work we'll see in the next 1 to 3 years.
Thank you. So another interesting question that I wanted to pose to all of you is we're talking a lot about like physical conservation things in the state, on a stream, habitat stuff, right? What are some of the other things that the organizations do, TU, BHA, Fish and Boat, what are some of the things that aren't necessarily the on-stream things that we're doing for conservation, and maybe kind of some of the other groups that we work with?
Well, policy matters are critical. You know, it's all of us on this call love to fish. Many of us also hunt. That's fine, but whether you like it or not, policy and regulatory matters that go on in Harrisburg are part of this fight, and often a fight, I shouldn't say it that way, in conservation. But backcountry hunters and anglers, as well as TU and a lot of other conservation groups, are actively engaged. So I want people to, or hope people that are watching know that it's organizations like TU and BHA that are out there advocating on their behalf, and we are just as much a constituent and engaging in the activities we all like. So those are things that go on that a lot of people don't see.
And on that policy front, we get involved, you know, obviously at the state level, but also at the federal level. We talk a lot about abandoned mine reclamation today. The Federal Abandoned Mine Reclamation Fund is currently up for reauthorization in Washington, D.C. So Fish and Boat Commission certainly works with groups like TU and BHA to advocate for federal legislation. Delaware River Conservation Act was recently passed, infusing a lot of resources into the Delaware watershed. As part of the ACE Act, federally, there was money into the Chesapeake. So we advocate for funding and programs on the national level. At the state level, it's interesting. You know, a lot of people don't realize that the Fish and Boat Commission, we don't receive general fund revenue. We're a user-funded agency, rely mainly on license sales and boat registrations. So one of the things that we do is we convey the relevance of that work to state legislators all the time. We work to get them out into the field so they understand the value of our license dollars. But we do everything we can to introduce those legislators to groups like TU. I mean, give credit where credit's due. So that policy work that we do, both, you know, that's pretty visible as well as behind the scenes, is a significant part of the portfolio of what we work on with TU and BHA.
Yeah. Over the last 3 years, I've tried to make a point to get out to see our chapters. We have 15,000 members in 49 chapters. And just last week, I met with our 49th chapter. I'm really excited, along with the stuff that Tim and John just spoke about. I'm really excited about the stuff happening on the local level. You know, the speaking to the legislators, having open houses, many comments, attending township and municipal meetings. You know, conservation is local. And I was really pleasantly surprised just how much knowledge our members have and how involved they are at the local level to deal with the local municipal issues and the permitting things that are impacting the streams on the local level. So, I mean, we're firing on all different levels. And, you know, I'm really excited to see that continue.
And I would like to build on something Greg said with the local officials. One of the things that the boom in outdoor recreation did last summer was made outdoor recreation relevant to local governments. And we brought back something called our boating facility grant program. Again, if you're listening to this and you maybe got a kayak for the first time or a canoe and you're connected to the water, we know that the township and municipal parks were just flooded with people looking for a place to put their boat in the water last summer. That stream access has made local governments realize how valuable those riparian areas are. So if you've got an area in your township that thinks, man, that'd be a great place for a kayak launch, a way to connect to the water, look us up. We get information about that on our website. But again, it goes back what I started with. It's relevant. Groups like TU and Greg and his partners, they're putting the stuff right in the front of the face of local elected officials, and they're thinking twice when they approve a new development about what sort of restrictions or requirements ought to be there to help protect local water quality.
Okay, we had a question coming from the audience, and I hope I'm gathering this correctly, but and I'm not sure if this will be aimed at Shawn and Dave, or any of you, I guess, could really field it. If brook trout populations are decreasing, would making all Class A streams catch and release only be one good way to preserve brook trout populations? So I guess maybe is that a relevant, or not irrelevant, but is that a feasible idea? Has that ever been talked about, or can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so Dan, this is Dave. I'll take that question. So certainly that is something that, we've been approached about in the past. And I think if, people listening to this really want to look for ways to protect brook trout, I mean, Shawn's presentation nailed it. I mean, you look at what impacts are truly causing a decrease in brook trout populations. It's not harvest from anglers. I mean, we know that from previous surveys that we've done. You look at the major impacts. I mean, it's habitat degradation. It's how we're using land use. It's climate change. So putting a regulation in place that prohibits harvest isn't going to do anything if the habitat is a limiting factor. So addressing the factors that are causing a decrease is really what folks need to be, concerned with. And all the great work that's been mentioned so far, as Greg mentioned, local TU chapters. I mean, these are the people that are the boots on the ground, that are doing tree plantings, that are working on riparian areas, in-stream habitat, the things that are actually going to improve the biomass or the density of fish in a population. So putting a regulation in place when harvest isn't the limiting factor isn't going to get us to where we need to be as far as protecting brook trout.
Thanks, Dave. Another question, and this is a little bit more on the fishing side. What's easier to catch, wild trout or stock trout?
How stealthy are you?
Yeah. Anybody feel free to weigh in on your opinions.
I think if you're willing to put in the time and really have a very stealthy approach, I think wild trout in many of our small streams, but it's a lot of work to do that stealthy approach.
I think in general, though, I think the thing I like about the question is it doesn't have to be hard. Dave talked about, resources all across Pennsylvania, places you can fish. Don't make it any harder than it needs to be. TU's got a lot of great resources. Dan said he's going to put some stuff up our website. Use the resources that are out there. We have family fishing programs. We keep hearing a lot about families that may be intimidated about getting fishing for the first time. Visit one of our family fishing programs. We have our introducing women to fly fishing. I mean, that gets booked up every single time we do it. So don't be intimidated. Check out TU, check out Fish and Boat. We can help you get started really easily.
Tim and Dave, do you want to touch on also the gear loaner program that Fish and Boat Commission has put together? That's a really exciting one. It's been mentioned in some of the past presentations. Can you let some folks know about what that looks like in PA?
Yeah, it's our fishing tackle loaner program. And think of it like checking out a book from a library. A lot of them are in state parks. Sometimes they're at public libraries, but again, go to our website. It's our fishing tackle loaner program. And, the rods, reels, the initial terminal tackle, they're right there for folks to get on loan. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to connect to the water.
Thanks, Tim. Since we were kind of covering in the past presentations some presentation and kind of actual physical fishing things, I'm wondering if you guys can talk, and maybe Shawn and Dave kind of being some more of the science focused. From a fly fishing angle, can you talk about some of the hatches that some of our anglers may be looking at? Because I know we've had a heavy response from new fly fishermen and women, so that might be of good interest to them if you can shed a little bit of light on some Pennsylvania specific bugs.
Sure, I can try to tackle some of that. So kind of depends what stream you're on. But I mean, some of the bigger hatches, a lot of caddis hatches kind of early on in the season, that April, early May timeframe. The sulfur hatch is always a big one on a lot of the streams. Things like Spring Creek has a big sulfur hatch. I know right now everybody's kind of gearing up for the green drakes on Penns Creek, and that's one of the larger mayflies. And really, if you're close to that area, even if you don't go out and fish it, I think it's really one of the spectacles of nature to go out and see that hatch in person. Just millions of bugs, big mayflies to see. I mean, I'd recommend checking around online as well to the specific streams that you're fishing. A lot of places, a lot of fly shops and things have hatch charts that kind of detail, you know, what you can expect on, say, the Clarion River or the Spring Creek and things like that in time of year. But you know, typical Pennsylvania hatches, some caddisflies, a few different color phases there, March browns, sulfur hatch, green drakes, Cahills, tricos in the kind of the midsummer time, and then a lot of really tiny bugs throughout the fall and winter and early spring months.
Yeah, for those new fly fishermen on the call, remember that old Christmas song, "It's the most wonderful time of the year"? Well, for the fly fishermen, between now and the 4th of July is the most wonderful time of the year. I live in the Poconos, and you know, we have multiple hatches going on right now. You know, sulfurs, caddis, the slate drakes will be coming on soon. As Shawn said, the green drakes out in the middle part of the state. This is really the funnest time of the entire year for fly fishing. If you have the opportunity, really go out and try and sample some of our streams.
Can one of you touch on the cicadas too for this
That's
year?
a social myth.
I can take a crack at it. So yeah, the Brood X, the cicada hatch, it's not going to cover all of Pennsylvania. The area I'm located, we're probably not going to see them. We're too far north. But yeah, I have reports they are starting. It's mostly going to be pretty much south central, southeastern and part of the Pocono area that'll be getting them. But it's dependent on the temperature of the ground. I think once ground temperatures get near 65 degrees, they'll start popping. So once they come out, you're probably going to have 4 to 6 weeks of fun fishing for any species that's willing to take them, anything from, you know, trout to carp to bass. I mean, it is really going to be a good time to really try fly fishing, you know, with a cicada. You'll enjoy it, and fish get very relaxed and very hungry and just will eat until they can't eat anymore. So it's certainly going to be a unique opportunity this year.
Yeah, and oh, go ahead, Shawn.
I was just going to add the benefit of that happening is that you don't need the really nice, delicate presentation of the fly on the water. You can slap that bug as hard as you can on the water and trigger strikes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd recommend anybody to, if they're unfamiliar with what we're talking about in the cicadas, to just give a Google search and called Brood X, and you'll find a bunch of information out of it. And to let everybody know, I'm located in the Lehigh Valley over by Allentown, and I found my first cicada in my yard yesterday. So they're about here. So we had a question come in that I'm a new trout fly angler introduced by my brother-in-law. I fished some creeks in Westmoreland County. Water levels seemed to be very low. Where can we find a resource for water levels and some research on best areas to fly fish? And I guess that's kind of two questions there. But I think a really good one to talk about would be that water level information, and because that's important for people to pay attention to.
Yeah, so if you go, and Dan, maybe you can include this in the resources, U.S. Geological Survey, they run an entire network of water level loggers, and it may not be specific to the stream you're interested in, but I can almost guarantee there's one close by, or at least the stream you're interested in is a tributary to something. But those actually give you graphs, and you can customize the graph to go out however many days, but it'll give you an idea, you know, kind of if the water's at a normal level, low level, or high level. And then as you fish that more and more and kind of reference back and forth to that, you kind of get a feel for, you know, if a certain stream's at 5 feet, maybe that's too high to wade. And eventually, you know, you start to see those patterns and things like that. But yeah, USGS, I think it's called Water Watch. If you Google that, or even just Google USGS and say you put in Pine Creek, it'll pop up with all the water level loggers on that particular stream. But And Dan, if you need, I can send a link to that as well to put in the resources.
Yeah, this would be a good place to also mention with those water levels. Again, we're seeing a lot of crossover activity between new anglers and new boaters. I'd say if there's one thing you remember from me all night is if you're going to fish from a kayak, wear your life jacket. We had 11 boating fatalities last year. None were wearing a life jacket. We had 4 so far this year. None were wearing a life jacket. So please, if the water looks unsafe when you're going out, don't get in. If you are going to boat, please wear your life jacket. Again, that's the biggest message I'd like to remember. You to remember if you're going to be fishing from a boat.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. That's huge, and that goes right along with our kind of day 1 presentation that we had, where we're talking about gear and what you need. You know, that PFD, if you're going to be on any kind of water vessel, is must-have gear for you. I think we have about time for one more question, folks. And I think this is probably going to be for you, Dave. Going back just a little bit, talking about the waters of Pennsylvania, and we have a couple of different types of creeks in Pennsylvania, types of water, more specifically freestone, spring creeks, and kind of tailwaters. Can you just discuss a little bit about what each of those are for the folks?
Yeah, so as far as, you know, the majority of the state is predominantly, you know, freestone streams. When you look at, you know, the North Central PA, when you talk about wild trout in Potter County, you're talking about freestone systems. As mentioned, we do have limestoners, and we have what I would consider, you know, traditional limestoners and limestone influence systems. When you look at some of the waters in North Central PA, like Fishing Creek, Penns Creek, you know, Baltimore Creek, that's more of a limestone influence system. Whereas when you look at Big Spring, Falling Spring, Latour, that's more of the traditional, very low gradient. Almost all of the flow is coming from spring sources. When you look at Big Spring, you know, there's no tributaries to it. You know, it's all relied on spring fed water. So that's more of like the traditional, you know, when people think of limestone streams, would be the systems that we have in South Central PA. And then tailwaters, you know, Pennsylvania really isn't known for their tailwaters. When people think of tailwater fisheries, they're thinking of, you know, big systems out west, you know, in Montana and Wyoming, where, you know, you have a tailwater. We do have some that I guess you could classify as tailwaters, you know, below the Allegheny Reservoir, in McKean County, you know, the Yaak certainly, and then, you know, as mentioned before, Lehigh, and then, you know, the biggest one that comes to tailwaters and probably what I would consider our best tailwater fishery would be the West Branch of the Delaware River, that comes out of Canonsburg from New York. So that's probably by far our best tailwater fishery. And to be honest with you, if you want to catch the biggest brown trout in Pennsylvania, head to the West Branch of the Delaware. That's probably where you have the best chance of catching, you know, a 2-foot plus fish anywhere in PA.
Can you just follow that up a little bit with, for the folks that don't know specifically, like what makes a freestone or a freestone stream and a limestone creek, and what a tailwater makes a tailwater?
Yeah, so as mentioned, you know, when you're thinking of limestoners, it's the source of the water. So it would be spring sources, you know, and it's predominantly, you know, in limestone areas, obviously, where you have higher alkalinity, very productive systems. And that's why you tend to see, you know, these being some of our most productive, highest density fish populations are coming from our limestone systems. And the freestones, you know, predominantly relying on, you know, water runoff, whether it's in them or tributaries. And again, these typically tend to be very, I shouldn't say infertile, but less infertile for the most case than what you would expect to find in a limestone system. So these would be your smaller, you know, brook trout streams, your headwater streams, that kind of stuff that's not relying on springs as the main source of water. And tailwaters, you know, people who think of tailwaters discharged from reservoirs is basically what would represent a tailwater fishery.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, folks, I think that's all the time that we have for today. First and foremost, I just want to thank our panelists for being here and speaking with us today. To have the caliber of gentlemen that are here today that are the leaders in their fields, specifically with Pennsylvania, to be here all together and kind of give us some really, really great information. I appreciate it so much. So thank you all. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind everybody to look out for the follow-up emails that'll be coming next week. We'll have replay links for this presentation, as well as, again, for the other presentations from earlier in the series. And again, I'll have that link for the resource page on there. I also dropped it in the chat in here, so if you want to take a look, feel free to do so. It will be updated as we go. There'll be other links that we put on there. Obviously, some popped up here kind of on the fly today, so we'll get those in there. And specifically, don't forget to kind of really dig through that, and don't check out all the links that you can. They're all going to be really valuable to you. The Fish and Boat Commission links, particularly the upcoming events that Fish and Boat and Pennsylvania TU have coming up. Like Tim had said, the women's intro to fly fishing programs. There's some, I think, coming up in Northwestern PA. There's some intro to just fly fishing programs that are happening in Northeast PA, I think. Or the Fish for Free Day coming up this Sunday on the 30th. So be sure to check all that stuff out. But that all said, I want to thank everyone who joined us all 3 weeks. I want to thank everyone that joined us on specific days that made this program successful. And we really appreciate all of your attendance. And again, thank you for Fish and Boat Commission, Pennsylvania Trout Unlimited, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers for all being a part of this and making this a huge hit. Thank you. And we'll see you all next time. Hopefully you have some good luck out there on the streams.
Good luck. Have a good holiday.
Thank you, Dan.